we are, with the leg, cut, we're ready to lay out for the socket, mortise, whatever you want to call it, for the legs. And of course, there's 3 legs, and I've already set my dividers. I usually set them for 3 paces to pace this off. You can take the radius of the circle, set your dividers from the center to the edge and pace off 6 times and use every other point. But sometimes on an edge like this, unless you can somehow stay right on that edge, by the time you get back to your 6th step there, it's off a little. So I just take a minute or 2 and just pace it off as 3. And just stay just inside the edge so your dividers have got somewhere to rest. So that looks good. So I'm going to make me a starting point. Mark that. Now I'm going to put the one pin of the divider or leg of the divider in that point. Make a second one. And then the third one. And I kind of mark them just as I move, so I don't, because they're not very big. And go back and make sure that I come back to my first mark. So now we have all 3 leg locations. And if one of these, the first one of these I made, I just quickly paced off, and the one of them had 2 legs that were too far apart, too close together, whatever you want to call it. And you'd think it would have ruined the table, but it really didn't. Once it was standing up, you didn't see it. So, but anyway, of course, you can do the best you can there. If you have a, this is just a little combination square, and it has a little center finding end on it. This is kind of nice, but not a have to. You can do this right here. Bring those on in. It makes, you can use the center line on the little gauge we made off of this line to set the gauge on. So I'm going to mark this one out so I don't get confused. Okay. So now we can use this center line we made with the Sharpie and just line that up. And we just, you want to trace, of course, all the way around on this one. And you can, of course, just go right around and do that on all 3. I generally, on this, I do one leg, one tail, and then one socket at a time. And instead of like cutting all the tails on all the legs and then start cutting sockets. The reason for that is if, say you accidentally cut this socket a little oversized, you can go to a leg that doesn't have the tail cut on it, and cut one just a little bit bigger. So you can do that till you get to the 3rd one, then you don't have any more legs. So, but anyway, it's an option. So now we need to make layout lines down this cylinder, and several ways to accomplish that. You can use, just like this combination square here. You can, slide it and rest it on this edge. It's kind of hard because it's kind of a little bit hard to see the line, and you don't have much to register the square on. This is something I came up with. It's just a piece of extruded aluminum angle. You can buy this at a home center hardware store. Not much to it. And I've cut and filed this end is square to the sides here. But I really don't know if that's important. As long as it lays flat, the two long sides here lay flat. To me, I would think it would be square. But anyway, mine's square on the bottom too, so I guess just to be sure. And you notice I cut the top at an angle just because I didn't want to take the time to square it. I didn't want to accidentally get it confused with the square again. So now we're just lining this up to our marks we just made off the gauge. And we bring those down the cylinder there. So now we're ready to start excavating this little socket. This is going to be the waste. So now we're ready to move down and start sawing. Okay, with all our layout done, we're ready to saw. And earlier I talked about the saw itself. You want a fine-tooth saw, and this is why, because we're sawing into the end of the grain. So it's not a big deal, but just not the way a rip saw normally wants to work. And we want to follow this line right here just on the inside. We want to leave most of that pencil mark. And this line is just a guide, and we're going to run into this one, I can already see. So it's laid out just a little bit too far to the left, but that's no problem. It's a guide as long as you stay same way, same place all the way down on it. So just kind of work both edges a little bit, or one edge at a time rather, and then kind of rock back up. And once you get down to the base here, now we start working as far as we can. We can't saw because of that shoulder, all the way down. And another thing is to watch out for is that shoulder. You can touch the top of it with a saw a little bit because we haven't turned that to finished size. But you don't want to saw a big notch in it. And once you get down to the end, I like to try to make at least a little curve for the toe of the saw. Just makes it, you can chop all that with a chisel, but I don't know, for some reason that's just the way I do it. And you can actually run, if your saw's pretty sharp, you can take that toe and cut a little more out in there. But saw all you can. It's easier to saw it than it is to chop it. So now we're going to, same thing on the other side. Just kind of take your time and watch your lines. Watch that shoulder. And then we're just try to clogs up with sawdust in there. Kind of kerf that last little bit in there. Okay, and that's about all you can do with a saw. Just get all of it you can. And we need to make a little stop. And we're going to just use a 1/2-inch auger. And we're going to bore down. And this makes a little area to kind of break the chip to stop the cut when we're chopping. And you can count the number of turns, and I know on this auger it's about 10 turns to go down the depth I want. So my cutters are touching 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So now we've got that. I generally start chopping. You can come in from the end and start splitting, but you have to be very careful. These two shoulders right here are critical. We don't have a whole lot of overhang on the legs, so if you chip much of those off is a pretty bad thing. So I generally, until I get down a little depth, come back the other way and just try not to, see, like right here the grain is diving just a little bit, so I'm going to come back and break that off from that direction. And I also, something I failed to mention, I changed chisels right here. I've got a, this is a 3/8, like a register chisel, a little heavier than that paring chisel. I can chop a little bit with it. And so the way I usually do it is try to get a pretty good little trough running down through there. And that way you can come back and pare from the sides, and that waste has somewhere to go. I'm actually going to clear this side a little bit so it doesn't grab the chisel. And so now just keep bring it right on down there. And don't get too big of a chip like that one was. And once that's you've got a little trough down through there, you can come back and split a little bit here. And once you get below them shoulders, of course the sides are a little bit tougher, but still, you know, don't be overly aggressive here, kind of. It's a you know, you don't want to break anything if you can help it. So you can see kind of what I've got there. I've got a little trough running right down the middle. One more little chop right there. So now at this point I can take with just the chisel and just hand pressure and start paring out from that little trough up to the walls. And it's not quite full depth either. Once I get some of this out of the way, I'll bring that on down as well. So just keep kind of working it a little bit at a time there. And it's easier. I'm using. I could use a wider chisel here, and I will in a minute. It's just easier to push the more narrow chisel with just hand pressure at this point. So you know, get most of your waste out with the narrow one, and then switch to the wider one to finish up. And I generally go on the bottom. I'll go ahead and take that pencil mark all the way out. If the tail contacts on the bottom of the socket, of course it pushes up and it won't set down. Be sure it's kind of clearing just a little bit. Okay, now I'm going to come back just underneath my shoulder. And I'm going to chop down kind of either side right here to clear that end. You don't need any kind of special chisel, just chop it right on down. Okay, we're looking pretty good there. Clean this bottom up just a little bit more. Okay, we're starting to look like something now. So now, last but not least, come back with I'm going to come back with a little bit wider chisel. And here again, kind of use the chisel a little bit like a plane. Use the back of it to kind of guide the cut. Just scooting it right down through there. And sometimes it will fit that way, but we're not going to get it stuck in there. So I'm going to switch to my little paring chisel and clean these corners out just a little. One other little thing that your little layout gauge we made earlier can do, you can kind of check the socket and see, once it'll turn around and go parallel, and we're still a little bit fat here, so take just a little more. Kind of a good gauge for the where you've gotten to. Okay, so check our gauge one more time here, and I think we're still just a little bit tight, but I'm going to test the leg just to make sure at this point. And it's a good idea before you start chopping to set the leg on the your layout lines and just be sure that your little layout gauge is kind of translating from one to the other. And just work your way up to a little start in. And I usually don't try to trim it to the point where I think it will go all the way in. I'd rather get it started and kind of, you can pull it back out and see where it's trying to rub at. So now we're started in. You do not want to drive this thing. So see, I'm getting tighter as I go down, so I know it's my mortise is tighter at the front. So I'm gonna take and one good thing about cherry, I don't think you can see it on the camera there, but it burnishes just a little bit as it, two pieces of it are rubbed together and makes a little shiny spot. Like right here, I can see one. So I know it's a high spot. Almost. So now I know I'm just about there. I think it'll make it this time. But that's normally how I fit them right there. My worst fitting ones are usually when one goes all the way in on the first try, because it generally means I'm off somewhere. So there it is. One other little detail before I move on. You see we've got a nice straight, tight joint there, both shoulders. And one other little thing, I'll have to pull the leg back out to show you. You can see these two little shiny lines. That is the shoulders actually compressing in just a little bit, and that's how close this joint's fitting. That's what makes that really nice gap-free fit. Last night I finished up the other two tails here, and the tail sticks up above the spindle just a little bit, and so we need to trim them down flush. And if you can see, this one I've already trimmed, and I've kind of blended that back into the leg right here. This one and this one are still high. And another little thing I've done, I think you can see, is I've numbered these. Just used an awl and just made, just little marks there. So these are each kind of fitted to an end. Even though they're all real similar and made off the same pattern, they're still fitted to a particular mortise, so or to a slot. So you don't want to get them confused because it makes it difficult. And right here, I'm going to shave this mark off. I'm going to use that little bit more narrow chisel, and you can just the way I usually do it is just pare it kind of flush out to the edge of the spindle, just like that, and then I'll come back with a spoke shave and finish that with a leg out of the spindle. And of course, be sure that before you do this, the leg is drove all the way as far down as it'll go. Okay, so now I've got just a little shoulder left right here. And if I can get one of these back out, and it just takes just a second. We'll trim that last little hump that's there off, and kind of like this one, kind of blend it back just a little bit. You don't want to see an obvious bump right here. So that's all there is to that. And then we'll take our scraper one more time. Okay, so that's ready to go. After you get these trimmed, we're ready to move back to the lathe and finish our turning here on the spindle. And if you'll notice too, we've got right here on the legs, we have it's projecting above the turning. Well, we need to turn this to final size before we finish this. So after we turn it to final size, we'll reassemble the legs, mark them, and then we'll finish shaping the top side, which doesn't take very long. And then of course the side profile as well. So let's go back to the lathe and get the turning finished up, and then we'll come back and finish up the legs.
This is Joshua Farnsworth. If you're interested in learning traditional woodworking with hand tools, visit my website at woodandshop.com, where you can find free video tutorials, workshop tours of amazing traditional woodworkers, and tool buying guides. You can ask questions and share your projects with thousands of woodworkers on my free traditional woodworking forum. Make sure you subscribe to my regular blog posts, and also check out my 10 steps for getting started in traditional woodworking. Enjoy!